Thanksgiving is coming up. Everybody that's celebrating it, I hope you're excited for it. Markets are already in a food coma. Nothing really exciting happened on Tuesday, which is great because that gives us a chance to talk about oil and the energy sector, and specifically the oil companies. As you know, after being negative on oil and energy, with the exception of uranium, for most of the year, I started to turn bullish on energy and specifically the oil companies in the past month. And interestingly enough, the secret why I turned bullish can be found in this chart of the WTI and the terrible performance in 2025. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Hot Trades of the Day, your show for swing trading ideas for the coming days, weeks, and month. So we look at the chart of WTI. It doesn't look great. It doesn't look terrible, but it certainly doesn't look great. I agree with that. I also agree that oil is not going to 200. But here's the interesting part. It doesn't need to for us to make a ton of money in the oil companies. And this is the interesting part, and this is the part that most people don't understand. Yes, historically, by any metrics, oil is severely undervalued right now. However, the energy landscape, especially with electric vehicles coming up, has also changed. Comparing today's oil price to the oil price in the 80s or the 90s or even the 2000s, that's kind of a little bit like an apples to oranges comparison. I give the oil bears that. And I think the oil bulls have the tendency to have a blind eye for that. But for my theory to work out and for us to make money in the oil companies, we don't need oil to go to 100 or 150. Here is the deal. You look at this chart, this has been a really bad year in the oil market. So what does that mean? That means we have a very low base as far as the oil price is concerned for next year. So that means even if the oil price just goes to 70, which, by the way, we were at in August, or we go to 80, where we were in January. So that's not that far out. That is $20 per barrel more for the oil companies in 2026 compared to 2025. That is a massive possibility for profit increases in the oil companies. That is the interesting part. Everybody's waiting for the gigantic oil rally. I'm actually with the bears. That may never come. I don't think we're going to see oil going to 200 just because demand has shifted. I do think oil is undervalued at this price, and I think oil will go to 80. And that's all we need to make a killing in the oil companies. And here comes the interesting part, and this is the reason why I like two categories. There are some really good European energy and oil companies out there. Total Energies from France, for example. Shell is pretty decent. But funnily enough, the ESG movement has been the best thing that happened to the American oil industry. So when the ESG movement, like about, what was that now, like 8 years ago, became hot, the majority of the European oil companies jumped on the regenerative energy train, solar, wind. They invested very heavily in these sectors. The American big oil companies went a different way, and this one is paying off super nicely now. They started to become more cost efficient. So Big oil in the US is now as cost efficient as they have ever been in the history of the oil sector in the US. And that's going back a long time. And that's the reason why you don't hear them complaining about even today's oil prices. So think about the profit increases possible if oil goes to 80 with these ultra efficient, cost efficient oil companies now in the US. They're going to print money. And at the same time, the stocks are extremely undervalued. You get juicy dividend yields. Plus, and this is the interesting part, this is the part that I love most, nobody is invested in energy right now. Nobody. You look at the weight that the energy sector has in the S&P 500, that's a joke. So that means if oil turns, that is the big signal for the broader market. Ooh, we need to get in on energy, we need to get in on oil. Now we are getting in before this. This is what we are looking at. And I want to show you something that this is already happening with smart money. So you see the oil price. You see how terrible their year has been. Let's take a look at this. So this right here is the oil services ETF. So this is the ETF, and this is where we were on January 2nd, right here. As you can see, we're actually in the plus for the year with oil services, even though oil has had a terrible year. How is that possible? That doesn't make any sense. And if we look at the history, as you can see, oil services pretty much does exactly what the oil price is doing. Except in September, it's completely started to deviate. You see that the oil price kept going down and oil services kept going up. It keeps going up. How is that possible? Well, the only explanation is clearly someone is buying. Someone is positioning themselves for oil to go up. Let's look at Valero, one of the big refiners in the US. Man, that's a great looking chart since August. Not so great, oil price right here. You clearly see what I'm seeing. By the way, yeah, what volatility in the market, what crash? There's absolutely zero selling pressure on Valero. There's absolutely zero selling pressure on the oil services. The opposite, there's buying pressure. The reason is these stocks are cheap. These stocks are cheap. And if the smart money expects oil to recover, and this is the important word, we're talking just recover in the price. Just go where you were at the beginning of 2025 for the majority of 2026, and all of a sudden, the whole earnings situation for next year will completely shift for the oil companies and the oil services companies. And nobody's talking about this right now. And this is the story. And this is why it is way more interesting for us to invest in the oil companies, which also offer us a juicy dividend, than investing in oil itself. I actually agree with the people that are more bearish on oil, that yeah, you'll probably make some money on oil in 2026, but I don't think that's where the big money is going to be made next year. The big money is going to be made in the oil companies. And by the way, besides the US Oil companies, I really like some of the emerging market oil companies, especially from Latin America. They offer amazing dividend yields. Latin America is breaking out. Emerging markets are awakening. Not all of them, but Latin America certainly is, as a region. So that gives us a double boost for these stocks. They're extremely cheap because no American investors invested in emerging markets. They're all invested in big tech and the Mag 7s. Well, if the oil companies start to move, people will look at the big emerging market oil companies. They'll see the dividend yields. These are not greatly run companies necessarily, right? If you want to invest in the best run companies, you pick the American big oil companies, and maybe something like Total Energies. But they're really cheap. These emerging market and LATAM companies, man, they give us a lot of dividends. That is just amazing. So those are my favorites right now. Again, don't get fooled. This chart, remember this chart, don't get fooled by the oil price. This looks very much like the gold and silver miners last year at the exact same time, when they were just going down and going down, even though gold was fine. Someone was clearly projecting a negative surrounding for the entire sector, so the dumb money will sell while they position themselves. And then you saw what happened with the gold and silver miners this year. Will we see the same type of pop in oil? I don't think so next year. I mean, especially when we talk about big oil companies. But again, that's not what they're there for. These are investments for the more stable, more secure, more conservative part of your portfolio. And then we do the miners and the uranium stocks to party. So for the more conservative part, the returns could be quite attractive in 2026 if I'm correct with my thesis. That's it for today. Now the only thesis is enjoy Thanksgiving, eat all the food you can, and have some gratitude. Let's lean back. We talk about the markets and money and gold all the time. That's all we do here. Fair enough. But we got it pretty good. I was texting with a friend in Kiev today. They have 8 hours of electricity right now there. And the winter is coming. So let's not complain too much. Let's have some gratitude and enjoy Thanksgiving. I'll be here Friday as usual. And the weekend video very likely coming up. Depends on what we see in the market, if there's something that we need to talk about. Bye-bye. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Oh, and go Sun Devils. Let's beat the Wildcats from the University of Arizona on Friday. That's a big one. Go Devils.